There's a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly explaining yourself. Not physical exhaustion, not even mental. It's something deeper, a soul-level tiredness that creeps in when you keep trying to be understood by people who are not even trying to understand you. Carl Jung, in all his exploration of the unconscious, saw this clearly when he said, "Stop explaining yourself. Healing begins when you be silent and choose yourself." He wasn't talking about arrogance. He was talking about liberation. We live in a world that conditions us to justify everything. Why we feel what we feel. Why we didn't answer the phone. Why we chose a different path. Why we're quiet. Why we're different. But the truth is, you don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace over chaos. You don't owe anyone a story about why you're healing quietly. You don't have to explain why you decided to walk away from something that didn't feel right anymore. And yet, most of us do. We over-explain because we were trained to please, trained to be liked, trained to not make anyone uncomfortable, even if it means we are deeply uncomfortable ourselves. And that's where Jung's words hit so hard, because silence isn't avoidance. It's power. When you stop explaining, you stop begging for approval. You stop handing your self-worth to people like it's a coupon they get to accept or reject. You start reclaiming your own energy. But it's not easy, because silence can feel like rejection, like abandonment, like giving up. You might even feel guilty. Guilty for not returning that message. Guilty for not defending your decision. Guilty for not justifying your boundaries. But here's the truth. Guilt is often the price of healing, because healing requires breaking patterns. And patterns are what make people comfortable with you. When you break them, you break expectations. And when you break expectations, people push back. So they'll say things like, "You've changed. You're distant. You think you're better than us." But what they're really saying is, "You're not doing what makes me feel safe anymore." And that's okay. You're not here to be someone else's emotional cushion. You're not here to be digestible. You're not here to shrink for the comfort of others. You're here to become whole, to become you. And becoming you requires silence, because in silence, you hear yourself. In silence, you feel the tension that your over-explaining was covering up. In silence, you meet the parts of yourself you've been hiding behind justifications. Jung understood this deeply. He knew that healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about making the unconscious conscious. And that can't happen when you're always performing, always explaining, always giving people a version of you that they'll accept, because the version they accept is usually not the version that's real. You become a character in someone else's story, not the author of your own, and eventually it wears you down. That's why so many people feel tired for no reason, not because they're doing too much, but because they're explaining too much, justifying every boundary, explaining every silence, apologizing for every moment of solitude. But you don't need to do that. You're allowed to be quiet. You're allowed to disappear for a while. You're allowed to not reply. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose peace. And you don't have to explain any of it, because explanation often isn't about communication. It's about control. We explain to control how others see us, to avoid being misunderstood, to protect ourselves from judgment. But healing isn't about control. It's about surrender. Let them misunderstand you. Let them talk. Let them create their own stories. That's none of your business. Your business is choosing yourself. Your business is returning to silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of presence. The silence of alignment, where your actions no longer need defending, where your peace no longer needs permission, where your healing no longer needs applause. And in that silence, you become dangerous, not because you harm others, but because you stop giving them the power to define you. And people fear that, because when you no longer play their game, you remind them they could stop playing too. So they push harder. They bait you. They try to get you to explain, to react, to defend. But you don't. You breathe. You stay grounded. You stay silent. And in that stillness, healing begins. Because healing doesn't look like loud declarations. It doesn't always look like crying or breakthroughs or Instagram quotes. Sometimes it looks like unfollowing someone, not answering that call, sitting quietly on your couch and choosing not to explain why. Sometimes it's just choosing you without witnesses. That's the real work. And Jung knew it. That's why he didn't tell you to fight. He told you to stop explaining, to be silent, to choose yourself. Because in that act, you return home, to yourself. There's something terrifying about silence in a world that constantly demands explanation. But silence isn't a void. It's a mirror. And what most people are truly afraid of is what they'll see in that mirror. Because when you're not busy explaining yourself, when you're not performing, when you're not justifying, you're left with nothing but you, your wounds, your regrets, your forgotten dreams, your unprocessed anger. And most people aren't ready for that confrontation. Carl Jung spent his life exploring this confrontation. He called it the shadow. Not a villain, not an evil, but the repressed parts of self, the pain, the shame, the needs you were told were too much. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you stop distracting yourself. You start seeing what's been there all along. Maybe it's a child who learned to be quiet because every time they spoke their truth, they were shamed. Maybe it's a teenager who hid their passions because it wasn't cool to care too much. Maybe it's the adult who built an identity around being needed because deep down they didn't feel wanted. That's your shadow. And when you fall silent, you finally hear it speak. But here's the gift. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that wants to be integrated. It's not trying to destroy you. It's trying to free you. Free you from pretending. Free you from perfection. Free you from people-pleasing. Free you from the addiction to being understood. Because being understood by others is a poor substitute for understanding yourself. And when you choose yourself, when you finally sit with your own silence, you begin to understand things you never saw before. You start noticing how often your boundaries were performances. How often your yes was really a, please don't leave me. How often your I'm fine was really, I'm scared you won't accept me if I'm honest. That's what over-explaining hides. It hides your fear of abandonment. It hides your trauma of being unseen. It hides your belief that your worth is conditional. And the world encourages this. Because a person who constantly explains themselves is easier to control. They're always defending, always shrinking, always waiting for permission to be whole. But healing doesn't wait for permission. It happens when you say, no more. I will not dilute myself to be understood. I will not justify my healing to people who benefit from my pain. I will not explain my boundaries like they're open for debate, because they're not. You don't explain the air you breathe. You don't justify why your heart beats. You don't owe anyone a thesis on why you deserve peace. Your existence is reason enough. And the moment you realize that, the moment you accept that your silence isn't emptiness but clarity, you step into what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not the version your parents wanted, not the version your friends are comfortable with, not the version society rewards, but the version that was always buried underneath the noise. And here's what they don't tell you about individuation. It's lonely. It's raw. It's not a highlight reel. It's full of grief. Grief for the time you lost explaining yourself. Grief for the relationships you maintain through performance. Grief for the self you abandoned to be loved. But grief is sacred. It means something is being released. And what's being released is who you're not, so you can finally meet who you are. And when you do, something powerful happens. You stop arguing with people who never try to understand you. You stop oversharing in hopes of feeling seen. You stop letting silence feel like rejection, because silence becomes your sanctuary. Not a punishment, not a threat, but a return. And in that return, you don't just heal, you evolve. People might not notice it at first. They'll say you become cold. You've changed. You don't care anymore. But they're wrong. You just stopped needing their approval to breathe. You stopped performing for love that was never real. You stopped betraying yourself for temporary validation. And now, you move differently. Not louder, not angrier, not colder, but clearer, quieter, more rooted. You start saying less, but meaning more. You start showing up without explanation. You start leaving spaces that require you to shrink. You start choosing yourself. Not once, not loudly, but consistently. Because real healing doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It whispers, "You're safe now." It whispers, "You don't need to explain anymore." It whispers, "You belong to you." And when you belong to you, no one else can own you. Not their expectations, not their narratives, not their projections. You become free, not in a way that screams rebellion, but in a way that breathes truth. And the truth is simple. You don't need to explain yourself. You never did. You just thought you did because somewhere along the way, someone convinced you that your silence meant guilt. But it doesn't. Your silence means strength. Your silence means clarity. Your silence means you finally trust yourself enough to stop explaining. Somewhere along your journey, someone made you believe that silence was a weakness, that if you didn't explain yourself, people would think you were wrong, that if you didn't defend your actions, you were guilty. But here's the truth. Real power doesn't beg to be understood. It simply is. You see, there's a certain kind of peace that comes when you realize you don't need to be gotten by everyone. When you finally accept that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, you stop inviting people to understand you when all they want is to judge you. You stop writing long messages hoping they'll see your side. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head for people who've already made up their mind, because all of that is noise, and you're done with noise. You've learned that healing doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be honored. And sometimes the most honorable thing you can do for yourself is to walk away, quietly, not out of pride, but out of love. Because what they never tell you is that healing is love. Love for your wounds. Love for your inner child. Love for the future version of you who doesn't have to carry all this weight. When Jung said, "Choose yourself," he wasn't saying to become selfish. He was saying, stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. Stop handing your energy to those who treat your soul like a convenience store. You are not required to be available for every misunderstanding. You are not required to carry every connection on your back. You are not required to be emotionally naked for people who won't even meet you with basic respect. Choosing yourself means choosing your own peace over someone else's chaos. It means choosing rest over running in circles. It means choosing silence over battles you never asked for. And yes, people will notice. They'll say you're distant. You've changed. You've built walls. But what they don't understand is, those aren't walls. They're boundaries. And they were built from bricks made of pain. Bricks you carried for years while they watched, while they expected more, while they demanded explanations. And now you're done performing. You're no longer explaining your trauma to people who use it as ammunition. You're no longer defending your choices to people who refuse to grow. You're no longer sharing your heart in rooms that echo back indifference. You're choosing you, softly, quietly, powerfully, because you've seen what happens when you don't. You disappear. You dissolve into their needs. You become a ghost in your own life. But not anymore. Now, you sit in your silence like a throne, not because you're cold, but because you're finally home. You realize that your worth was never in your ability to explain. It was in your ability to be. Be still. Be whole. Be unapologetically you. And the moment you truly accept that, the moment you stop explaining and start existing, something inside you clicks. Your body relaxes. Your mind quiets. Your heart stops racing to prove itself. You remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You remember the child who loved quietly, who played freely, who cried when it hurt, who didn't explain themselves because they didn't know they had to. That's who you return to. That's who you protect now. And you realize that healing isn't something you chase. It's something you allow. It happens not in chaos, but in calm, not in speaking louder, but in softening your voice, not in convincing the world, but in coming home to yourself. So let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them invent stories about who you are now. It doesn't matter, Because you finally made the choice you were always afraid to make. The choice to stop performing. The choice to stop pleading. The choice to stop explaining. And to start living. In your truth. In your silence. In your wholeness. No apologies. No footnotes. No disclaimers. Just you. Real. Raw. Rooted. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to understand yourself. You're not here to explain why you're healing. You're here to heal. You're not here to justify your silence. You're here to listen to it, to sit with it, to trust it, because in that silence, something sacred begins. Your real life, the one where you are no longer a prisoner of people's opinions, the one where your value is not up for debate, the one where your boundaries speak louder than your explanations, the one where you choose yourself, again and again and again, and you don't owe anyone a single word about it.